She went pale when she discovered the truth. Ileana stood at the bridge of the ship, her hands clasped behind her back as the vessel glided smoothly through the vast, starry expanse of space. The silence around her was deep, only broken by the soft hum of the engines. It had been a routine mission at first, a simple patrol near the border station. Yet, something felt different this time. The air around her seemed charged with a strange anticipation, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to unfold. Her eyes scanned the viewscreen ahead, observing the distant lights of their destination growing closer with each passing second. The beacon of the station was a pale blue pulse against the black void. As the ship approached, a sudden flicker interrupted the steady pulse of the signal. The moment was subtle, but Ileana's instincts, honed over years of service, caught it. "Commander," a voice broke through her thoughts. Lieutenant Forrest stood at the doorway, his face tight with concern. "We're detecting an anomaly, the distress signal. It's not human. It's encrypted, but it doesn't match anything in our database." Ileana turned to face him, her gaze sharpening. "What do you mean it's not human?" She was used to dealing with unfamiliar signals, but this one felt different. Human communication, even encrypted, had a distinct pattern to it. This was something new. Forrest hesitated, then stepped forward to hand her a data pad. The screen displayed a pattern of signals, strange, irregular, and unlike any language they had encountered. Ileana studied the symbols, trying to make sense of it. There was an odd sense of familiarity in the way the signal was arranged, but it was all encoded in a way that left her with more questions than answers. "Could it be a trap?" she asked, her voice calm but her mind already running through the possibilities. "I don't think so," Forrest replied, "but we won't know until we investigate. The anomaly is coming from an unknown vessel. It's drifted off course and its engines are malfunctioning." Ileana nodded, her mind already at work, calculating the risks. Her crew was highly trained, but this situation was unlike any they had faced before. They had encountered derelict ships, but never one with such an unidentifiable signature. "Prepare a team," she ordered. "I'll lead the mission. We need answers, not assumptions." Forrest immediately set to work, but as Ileana turned back to the viewscreen, her thoughts drifted. This mission was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance. Yet the more she looked at the unknown ship, the more it tugged at something deep within her. The faintest whisper of a memory danced on the edge of her mind, one she couldn't place. The team boarded the small shuttle and descended toward the source of the signal. Ileana's heart beat steadily in her chest, her focus unwavering as the shuttle cut through the dark atmosphere. The ship was an eerie sight, dark, metallic, and seemingly abandoned. Its hull was scorched in places, and the lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across the surface. Ileana signaled for the shuttle to land. As the landing gear touched down with a soft thud, she was the first to step out onto the cold metal floor of the ship. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of long-forgotten machinery and rust. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's power systems struggling to stay alive. "Stay alert," Ileana instructed her team as they moved forward. Her boots echoed through the corridors, a sharp contrast to the oppressive quiet. The walls were lined with strange markings, symbols and designs that Ileana didn't recognize. Some looked vaguely familiar, but nothing she had seen in her training. As they moved deeper into the ship, they encountered the first signs of life, empty, lifeless bodies preserved in cold storage. The crew members had been human, but their faces were eerily still, their bodies frozen in a state of unnatural preservation. Ileana's stomach churned as she stepped forward, reaching out to examine one of the bodies. The clothing was different, nothing like the uniforms worn by the military or any other species they had encountered. "Who were they?" whispered Lieutenant Forrest, his voice tight with awe and fear. The idea that humans, long thought extinct, had once traversed the stars was a thought that seemed impossible. "They were the humans we've been told were lost to history," Ileana said quietly, her mind racing. She didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed to the truth. These were humans. But how? How had they ended up here? The ship's logs, as they discovered, were corrupted. There were no clear answers, only vague, cryptic references to the old world and the fall of humanity. Each word seemed to hint at a much darker history, one that Ileana had never been taught. Everything she had known about the galaxy, about her own people, felt like a lie. This ship, this discovery, had opened a door to a truth that threatened everything she believed in. As the crew explored further, they found more disturbing signs. Hidden rooms, more bodies, each preserved, each carrying with them the echoes of a forgotten past. The most shocking discovery came when Ileana stumbled upon a chamber filled with strange technology, alien to her eyes but oddly familiar. The equipment, though complex, bore subtle markings that matched those of her own species. It was then that it hit her. The humans hadn't been destroyed by an alien force. They hadn't vanished in some cosmic catastrophe. They had been erased, systematically, deliberately, by her own people. Ileana stood there, the weight of the realization sinking in. Her species, the very ones she had sworn to protect, had buried the truth about humanity, erasing their existence from history. And now, here she was, standing in the middle of that forgotten past. "We need to get back," Ileana said, her voice low. Her mind was a whirl of confusion and anger. She had to find out the truth. She had to uncover what had happened to the humans and why her own people had hidden it from the galaxy. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Ileana couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The answers she had uncovered raised even more questions, questions that could change everything. The stars outside the ship now seemed far less distant, as though the weight of this discovery had drawn them closer. Ileana didn't know what she was going to do next, but one thing was certain. The galaxy had been built on lies, and it was time for the truth to be revealed. As Ileana sat in the briefing room, her thoughts swirled like a storm. She had always believed in the strength and righteousness of her people, the alien empire she had served her entire life. She had been taught that humanity was a forgotten species, one that had either disappeared long ago or never truly existed. Yet now, staring at the evidence before her, everything she had known felt like it was built on a foundation of lies. She ran her hand through her dark hair, frustration and confusion etched on her face. Her team was gathered around, their expressions just as grave as hers. Faris, Lieutenant Curran, and the others were silent, each processing the shock in their own way. It wasn't just the sight of the preserved human bodies or the strange technology they had discovered. It was the implications. The humans were real, and her people had been hiding the truth from the galaxy for centuries. "How could they have been erased like this?" Curran asked, his voice barely a whisper. He had always been a loyal member of the military, a strong believer in the Empire. To him, the discovery was a personal betrayal. Ileana felt a pang of sympathy for him, but her own sense of betrayal was far deeper. "I don't know," Ileana replied, her voice steady but filled with an underlying anger she could no longer hide. "But I intend to find out." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Ileana knew that she was no longer the same person who had stepped aboard that ship. This revelation had changed everything. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much of her life had been spent serving a government that had lied to her. No, lied to all of them. Humanity wasn't a forgotten species. They had been wiped from history by the very people Ileana had once trusted above all else. Her mind wandered back to the moment she had first discovered the human artifacts, the weapons, the markings, the symbols. The technology on that ship had been far more advanced than anything her people had ever developed. The humans had been capable of so much, yet they had been erased as though they never existed. She had to understand why. Why had her people, the ones she had believed to be just and honorable, committed such an atrocity? What was it about humanity that made them a threat? The questions flooded her mind, each one more urgent than the last. "I think it's time we contact the human rebels," Ileana said, breaking the silence. The words felt strange coming from her mouth, but they were the only logical next step. The human resistance had been operating in the shadows for years, hiding from the empire that sought to erase them. They were the only ones who might have the answers she was seeking. Faris hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Commander? We're talking about treason." "If we're caught, I'm already a traitor to them," Ileana cut him off, her voice sharp. "And you all are too. We've seen the truth. Now we have to act on it." There was no turning back now. Ileana could feel it in her bones, the weight of her decision. It wasn't just about the humans anymore. It was about everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in. The empire she had sworn to protect was built on a lie, and she could no longer stand by and let it continue. The crew spent the next few hours preparing. The mission to contact the human rebels wasn't going to be easy. The Empire's intelligence network was vast, and they had eyes everywhere. Any sign of disloyalty, any hint of rebellion, and they would be hunted down without mercy. Still, Ileana couldn't ignore the call to uncover the truth. The lies had gone on long enough. Once they were ready, they set course for the coordinates provided by the encrypted signal they had found on the ship. The shuttle rumbled as it took off, leaving the confines of the military base far behind. As they traveled through the stars, Ileana couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, but she knew that the farther they went from the Empire's reach, the more they risked exposure. The journey felt endless, the silence in the shuttle oppressive. The crew members were all tense, their minds occupied with the mission ahead. Ileana could feel their eyes on her, some filled with uncertainty, others with a sense of determination. She understood their hesitation. They had always been soldiers, trained to follow orders without question, but now they had to question everything. As they approached the coordinates, Ileana felt a chill run down her spine. This was it, the moment where their loyalty would be tested. They had no idea what to expect when they reached the human rebels, but she was ready. She had to be, for the truth. The shuttle descended into a remote valley on a forgotten planet, hidden deep in an uncharted part of the galaxy. The area was rich with dense forests and towering mountains. It looked like the kind of place where secrets could easily be buried. And it was here in this isolated location that the human rebels had made their home. They landed in a clearing, the engines powering down with a soft hum. The crew disembarked, cautiously stepping onto the planet's soil. The air was thick with tension, the silence pressing down on them like a weight. "Stay close," Ileana ordered, her voice steady as ever, but inside her heart was racing. She wasn't sure what to expect from the human rebels, but one thing was certain: they had answers, and she was determined to find them. As they moved through the dense forest, the trees began to thin, revealing a hidden camp. It wasn't much, just a few makeshift buildings surrounded by tall fences. It looked like a place that had been hastily put together, a place built out of necessity, not comfort. And in the center of it all stood a figure watching them approach. The man was tall, dressed in simple clothes, but there was a certain presence about him that made Ileana's heart skip a beat. His eyes locked onto hers, intense and calculating. There was no fear in them, only the hardened resolve of someone who had been fighting for far too long. "You must be the one they sent," the man said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Ileana, the commander who betrayed her empire." Ileana stiffened at the words, but she didn't flinch. "I didn't betray anyone. I'm here to find out the truth." The man studied her for a moment before nodding. "The truth, huh? That's what we all want, but be careful, Commander. The truth has a way of changing everything." And with that, the man turned, leading Ileana and her crew into the heart of the rebel camp, where secrets were kept and the past was remembered. As they walked, Ileana couldn't help but wonder if she was about to learn something that would change the course of history forever. Ileana stepped cautiously through the camp, her senses heightened as she followed the man, Dante, as he had introduced himself, into the heart of the rebel base. The buildings around her were simple, built from whatever materials the rebels could find, but there was an undeniable air of purpose in every structure. Despite the humble surroundings, it was clear that this was a place of strength, where every person had a role to play. The air was thick with the sounds of distant conversations, a few quiet arguments, and the clatter of metal tools. Ileana's crew followed close behind, eyes scanning their surroundings. It felt odd to be here, so far from the empire she had once sworn to protect. Each step she took felt heavier, as though the weight of her past was pulling at her, trying to keep her tethered to a lie. As they approached a central building, Dante turned to her, his gaze steady. "This is where we hold our councils," he said, pushing the door open and stepping aside for her to enter. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with a long table at its center. Around the table sat a group of individuals, each of them looking up as Ileana entered. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to suspicion, but none of them seemed surprised to see her. It was as if they had been expecting her all along. "Commander Ileana," Dante said, addressing the room, "this is the heart of our resistance." Ileana nodded, taking a seat at the table. Her crew followed suit, though they remained tense, unsure of what to expect. She could feel their eyes on her, and she knew they were all thinking the same thing. How had they ended up in a place like this, on the other side of the very empire they had once served? "Why am I here?" Ileana asked, her voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "What is it that you're really fighting for?" Dante exchanged a glance with the others before answering. We're fighting for the truth that's been hidden from the galaxy for centuries. You've seen the evidence on that ship. Your people erased humanity from history, but we never stopped fighting. The words hit Ileana harder than she expected. She had come here for answers, but hearing them spoken aloud made the reality of the situation feel far more concrete. Her people had destroyed the truth, hidden it so deeply that even she hadn't known it. Humanity had been erased from history, and the more she learned, the more she realized that it was her people who had done it. I don't understand, Ileana said softly, shaking her head. Why? Why would they do such a thing? Dante's face hardened, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and anger. The Empire feared humanity. They saw our potential, and they knew that if we ever returned, we would challenge everything they had built. Your people destroyed us because they saw us as a threat to their power. Ileana felt a pang of guilt. The more she learned, the more it felt like everything she had been taught was a lie. She had been raised to believe that her empire was the beacon of justice and order in the galaxy. But now, she was beginning to see it for what it truly was, a force built on fear and manipulation, one that had destroyed an entire species to maintain control. I don't know what to believe anymore, Ileana admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've spent my whole life serving the Empire, but now I don't know if I can stand by and let this continue. Dante placed a hand on the table, leaning in slightly. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Commander, but you've seen the truth. Now it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with it. You can continue to serve a lie, or you can join us in exposing the truth. The choice is yours. Ileana sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was the moment of truth. She had always believed in the cause she had been a part of, but now that cause felt hollow. It was built on lies, and she couldn't ignore that any longer. She had seen the human rebels fight for their freedom, for the chance to live without fear of an oppressive empire. They had fought for a future where they could exist, free from the shadow of a regime that sought to erase them. As Ileana thought about her next steps, she couldn't help but think about the crew who had followed her here. They, too, had been part of the Empire, and they, too, were now caught in this web of betrayal. Would they follow her down this uncertain path? Would they join her in the fight for a future where the truth could no longer be hidden? I've spent my life believing in the Empire, Ileana said slowly, looking around the room at the faces of the rebels. But now I know that I've been part of something that destroyed humanity. I can't turn my back on what I've seen. Dante nodded, his expression softening. It's not easy, Ileana, but you've already made the hardest choice. You've seen the truth, and now you have to decide if you're going to help us bring it to light. The others in the room remained silent, waiting for her response. Ileana could feel their eyes on her, but it wasn't the same as before. This time there was no judgment, no expectation. They were waiting for her to make her own decision, to take responsibility for the truth she had uncovered. I'll help, Ileana said, her voice steady, but her heart was pounding in her chest. I'll help you expose the truth. I'll help you bring down the Empire. The room erupted in murmurs of approval, and for the first time since she had arrived, Ileana felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain and the risks were great, but she had made her choice. She would fight for the truth, no matter the cost. Thank you, Commander, Dante said, a small but genuine smile crossing his face. We'll need all the help we can get, but with you on our side, I know we can win. Ileana nodded, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about fighting for humanity's survival anymore. It was about bringing the truth to the galaxy, about ending the reign of a corrupt empire that had hidden the past for far too long. As Ileana left the council room, the weight of the decision she had just made settled into her bones. There would be no turning back now. She had chosen her side, and she would fight to ensure that the truth, humanity's truth, was no longer buried. The journey ahead would be dangerous, filled with obstacles and enemies at every turn. But for the first time in a long while, Ileana felt like she was on the right path. The Empire had lied to her, but now it was time to tell the galaxy the truth. And no matter the cost, she would ensure that humanity's legacy would no longer be forgotten. Ileana had never known fear like this. As the shuttle entered the atmosphere of the Empire's capital planet, her heart raced. The towering spires and gleaming structures of the city below seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of everything she had once fought for. Now she was here to destroy the very system that had raised her, the very system she had once believed in. It had taken weeks to gather enough information to make their move. Dante and the rebels had infiltrated key systems, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment. Ileana and her crew had trained with the resistance, learning their tactics and preparing for the battle ahead. It had been a hard road, but now they were ready. The truth had to be exposed. The Empire had to fall. The shuttle descended toward a hidden landing pad deep within the city's industrial sector. It was far from the shining towers of power, a place where the elite of the Empire never ventured. The air outside was thick with smog and the hum of machinery, a stark contrast to the pristine beauty of the city Ileana had known. This was the heart of the Empire's corruption, where the machines of war were built, where secrets were buried, and where the truth had been hidden for centuries. Ileana's hand gripped the edge of her seat as the shuttle touched down. The crew around her was quiet, their faces tense. They had all come a long way to get to this point. Some of them had once been loyal soldiers of the Empire, just like her. Others had joined the resistance later, after their eyes were opened to the truth. Now they were united by a common goal, to expose the lies and bring down the Empire that had tried to erase humanity. The shuttle door hissed open, and the cool air of the industrial sector washed over them. Ileana took a deep breath, trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her stomach. There was no going back now. This mission was their only chance to make a difference, to fight for the truth. But the risks were enormous. The Empire would never let them succeed without a fight. "Stay close," Dante said, his voice low but commanding. "We move fast, in and out. We don't have time for mistakes." Ileana nodded, signaling her team to follow as they moved quickly toward a nearby alleyway. The buildings around them were dark and imposing, towering over the streets like silent sentinels. The sound of distant engines and clanging metal echoed through the alley as they navigated the narrow streets. It was a stark contrast to the polished, orderly world of the Empire's elite. Here, in the shadows, the rebels thrived. As they approached the entrance to the underground facility they were targeting, Ileana could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The facility was the heart of the Empire's military production, where weapons were designed and manufactured. It was also the place where the Empire had kept its darkest secrets, secrets that had kept humanity's existence hidden for centuries. The security was tight, but Dante and his team had planned every detail. They knew the patrol patterns, the locations of the cameras, and the best way to breach the facility. As they reached the entrance, Ileana took a deep breath and followed Dante into the shadows. They moved silently, keeping to the edges of the building, avoiding the guards that passed by. The tension in the air was palpable. Every step they took felt like a step closer to either victory or disaster. Ileana's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her focus. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. They reached the access point, a small door hidden behind a stack of crates. Dante worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he bypassed the security system. A soft click sounded and the door swung open. The team moved inside, weapons drawn and eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Inside, the facility was cold and sterile, the walls lined with rows of machinery and equipment. Ileana's eyes flicked to the monitors on the walls, each one displaying blueprints for weapons and systems she had seen before in the Empire's highest command centers. It was all so familiar, and yet so different. This was where the Empire's true power was forged, hidden from the rest of the galaxy, built on lies and bloodshed. "Over here," Dante whispered, motioning to a small room at the far end of the facility. "This is where they kept the data, the records we need." Ileana nodded, leading the team forward. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the silent halls. As they reached the room, Dante went to work again, bypassing the security system that guarded the data storage. With a soft hiss, the door slid open, revealing a small chamber filled with rows of data drives and servers. "This is it," Dante said, his voice filled with anticipation. "The evidence we need to expose the truth." Ileana stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for one of the data drives. The information contained within these files would change everything. It would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that humanity had been erased from history, hidden away by the very empire that now controlled the galaxy. As she plugged the drive into the system, the data began to download. Ileana's heart raced as the files appeared on the screen. It was everything: the evidence of humanity's existence, the records of their history, and the detailed account of the Empire's actions to erase them from the galaxy's collective memory. "We've got what we need," Ileana said, her voice firm. "Let's get out of here." But as she turned to leave, a loud crash echoed through the facility. The sound of footsteps, heavy and urgent, echoed down the hall. The guards had arrived. "Move now," Dante shouted, grabbing Ileana by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. The team sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps pounding against the cold metal floors. The alarms blared, the red lights flashing in a desperate warning. Ileana's breath came in ragged gasps as they rounded a corner and spotted the exit. But just as they reached it, a group of armed soldiers appeared in the doorway, blocking their escape. "Get back!" one of the soldiers shouted, raising his weapon. "This is an Imperial facility. You are under arrest." Ileana's heart stopped for a moment, but then Dante stepped forward, his expression hardening. "We don't have time for this," he said, his voice cold. He raised his own weapon, and before anyone could react, the first soldier fell to the ground, his body crumpling to the floor. The rest of the soldiers hesitated, but Ileana could see the fear in their eyes. They had been caught off guard. They had never expected anyone to challenge the Empire like this. "Move now," Dante shouted again, and the team pushed past the soldiers, their weapons raised. A firefight broke out, the sound of gunfire echoing through the facility. Ileana's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She had made her choice. The truth had to be exposed, no matter the cost. They fought their way out, their movements precise and calculated. It was a blur of gunfire and shouting, but Ileana kept her focus. They had the data. They had the proof. Now all they had to do was survive and get it to the rest of the galaxy. Finally, they reached the exit. The shuttle was waiting for them, its engines already powering up. As they ran toward it, Ileana could hear the sound of reinforcements coming. They were close, but they were not close enough. "Go!" Dante shouted, and Ileana and her crew climbed into the shuttle, their weapons still drawn. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the shuttle lifted off, soaring into the sky. As the shuttle ascended, Ileana looked out the window at the city below. The Empire's capital, the center of its power, was now behind them, but this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Ileana sat quietly in the shuttle, watching the planet below as it shrank into the distance. The red lights of the alarmed base were still flashing in her mind, the sound of gunfire and shouting still ringing in her ears. Her hands gripped the data drive tightly, her thoughts racing with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and relief. The mission had been successful, but the true test was still ahead. The truth they had uncovered, the files they had stolen from the Empire's heart, were going to change everything. Humanity's history, hidden for centuries, was now in their hands. Ileana felt the weight of it all. She had believed in the Empire. She had fought for it, lived for it, trusted it. But now, after everything she had seen, she knew it was built on lies. Beside her, Dante was quiet, his eyes scanning the controls of the shuttle. He had led them through the mission with a calm determination, but she could see the strain in his shoulders. The human resistance had fought for so long in the shadows, always one step ahead of the Empire's hunters. Now, with this data, they had a chance to bring everything to light. But the journey wasn't over. The Empire would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. They knew they would be hunted. Ileana looked to her crew, who were all equally tense. Faris, Curran, and the others, once soldiers of the Empire, were now rebels. They had followed her through thick and thin, and now they had no choice but to follow her into a new fight. There was no going back. "How long until we reach the rendezvous point?" Ileana asked, breaking the silence. "About an hour," Dante replied, his voice steady but with an edge of weariness. "We'll need to move quickly once we're there. The Empire will already be on high alert, and we don't have much time." Ileana nodded. They were headed to a hidden base, a safe house where the human rebels could make contact with other resistance cells. The galaxy needed to know the truth. They couldn't afford to waste any time. As the shuttle continued its journey, Ileana's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. The data they had gathered wasn't just about revealing humanity's true history. It was about tearing down the walls the Empire had built to keep their control over the galaxy. The galaxy had been manipulated, lied to for so long. But now, the truth would spread. She couldn't imagine what it would feel like for people across the galaxy to learn that humanity hadn't been wiped out, that they were real, that they had been hidden away by the very Empire that now ruled them. She thought about the faces of the rebels she had met, the ones who had never given up the fight. They had been waiting for this moment, hoping for a chance to reclaim what was theirs. Ileana felt a surge of determination. They couldn't fail. The future of humanity and the galaxy depended on it. "Commander," Faris spoke up, his voice low but firm. "We're not just exposing the Empire's lies, we're exposing everything. The people will demand justice. The Empire will fall." Ileana turned to face him, seeing the fire in his eyes. He had changed just like she had. They all had. They had been soldiers once, but now they were rebels, fighting not just for survival, but for a chance at freedom. "I know," Ileana replied quietly. "And we have to be ready for whatever comes next. The Empire won't let this go easily, but we can't turn back. We've come too far." The shuttle glided smoothly through the stars, the quiet hum of the engines filling the space around them. For a moment, Ileana allowed herself to relax, but it was only for a moment. The Empire had a long reach, and they would stop at nothing to protect their power. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. As the shuttle neared the rendezvous point, Ileana's thoughts turned again to the future. The data they had stolen wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon, and it was one they had to use carefully. If they exposed the truth too quickly, it could set off a chain reaction of violence and chaos. But if they waited too long, they might never get another chance. The Empire would do everything in its power to silence them before they could reveal what had been hidden for so long. Finally, the shuttle descended, touching down on the hidden base. The place was small, isolated, but it was safe. For now. Ileana stepped off the shuttle, her boots hitting the cold metal ground. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The fight was just beginning. The team quickly moved inside, where they were met by a few familiar faces, rebels who had been waiting for them. Their eyes were filled with hope and anticipation, and for the first time in a long time, Ileana felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: optimism. They were about to change everything. The truth was within reach. "We've got the data," Dante said as he stepped forward, holding out the drive. "It's time to expose the Empire for what it is." The rebel leaders gathered around, their expressions serious but hopeful. Ileana could see the weight of the moment in their eyes. They all understood what this meant. The Empire would do everything in its power to stop them. They couldn't afford to fail. A woman with short-cropped hair and a hard look stepped forward. She was one of the rebel leaders, someone who had seen countless battles. She reached out for the data drive, her fingers brushing against it as she took it from Dante's hands. Her gaze shifted to Ileana, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no need for words. They all knew what was at stake. "This is it," the woman said quietly. "This is our chance. We expose the Empire's lies, and we give the galaxy a chance at freedom." Ileana nodded. "We can't waste any more time. We need to get this data to the people. We need to show them the truth." The rebel leaders moved quickly, setting up communications equipment and securing the data for transmission. The plan was simple but risky. They would broadcast the information across the galaxy, hacking into Imperial communication channels to ensure it reached as many people as possible. The rebellion was about to take a giant step forward, but it was a step into the unknown. As the transmission began, Ileana watched the screens in front of her. The data, the truth, was being sent out. Across the galaxy, people would hear it. They would learn that humanity had never been lost, that the Empire had hidden them away, erased them from history. The Empire would be exposed for the fraud it was. But as the transmission continued, Ileana couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Empire had too many resources, too many ways to stop them. They had to act fast. They couldn't afford to be caught. Suddenly, alarms blared through the base. Ileana's heart skipped a beat. The Empire was coming. They had been discovered. The transmission was live. "Move now," Dante shouted, and everyone sprang into action. Ileana ran with the others, her mind racing. They had done it. The truth was out, but now they had to survive. The Empire was coming for them, and there would be no mercy. They had taken a huge risk, and they couldn't afford to lose now. As they fought their way through the base, Ileana felt a strange sense of peace. The truth had been revealed. The Empire's grip on the galaxy had been broken. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a beginning of something new. And for the first time in her life, Ileana believed that humanity, no matter how many times they had been erased, would never be forgotten again. The truth had a way of spreading, and once it was out, nothing could stop it.